Brussels, the Flemish one. And just now that Lawrence kindly has pressed record, can I ask you, Lawrence, also to give Benjamin his co-authors, right, so he can share the screen. We will. We will give Benjamin the right to go first in 15 minutes, and we will see if Alexander is able to join us or connect with us then. I will do the formal introduction of Alexander if he appears, but now that we have Benjamin here, he's a PhD student still to defend, so I would suspect all feedback is welcome on paper that he is presenting here. Those of you who had the chance to have a look around in Google Scholar, he has several other interesting publications on politics in the Brussels capital region and political parties that represent or seek to reach out beyond their core constituencies. So we're looking forward to his PhD being completed in time. I think there is the paper that Benjamin, you're presenting today is also a paper incoming, right? But you can say a few words on that yourself. So the microphone is yours. We'll give you 15 minutes. I'll turn the camera off, and in 12 minutes reappear, so you know that you have 3 more minutes to go if you don't. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Timothy. I will first try to share my screen. Voila. If this is all right. No. You all see and hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you very much, Timothy, for your kind words. Indeed, I will be presenting a paper that has already been accepted for publication in Publius, the Journal of Federalism, and hopefully will come out soon, so that I will be able to share it with all of you. I'd be very happy with that, of course. Importantly, it's written together with my promoter, Didier Blanckaert. We both are affiliated to the Free University of Brussels, and the title of the paper is Out of Many One, Exploring Ethno-Linguistic Identity Appeals in the Brussels Capital Region. And when one thinks of Brussels, one of the first things that often comes to mind is perhaps the deep divisions between Dutch speakers on the one hand and Francophones on the other. And yet, what we see is that many people in Brussels tend to believe that there has been developed over time a Brussels identity. In other words, a shared identity that can be inclusive of members of both the Dutch, the French, and also many other ethno-linguistic minority groups that the region is housing. And that is actually where this research is all about, or this paper is all about. The idea of a shared identity in a deeply divided polity, in a consultation of democracy. And the reason is that in the past, in the literature, it has been hypothesized by some scholars that in the long run, consociationalism will weaken the distinct group identities and may pave the way for a shared identity. And so once again, an identity that can be claimed by members of the significant groups within society. However, prior studies testing this claim have yielded inconsistent results, whereas some have found some evidence for this claim. Others started questioning the political as well as societal relevance of a shared identity altogether. But rather than examining the effects of consociational institutions on development of shared identities, we took a different approach by focusing on the political elite's perspective, which we tend to see as the key actors in developing shared identities. And more specifically, we asked ourselves the research question fundamentally to what extent do these political parties appeal to shared identities, if they do at all, within a consociation? And to do so, we focus on the Brussels capital region in Belgium, which is a prime example of a corporate consociation, and more specifically, a regional corporate consociation, because it involves a grand coalition of Dutch speakers and Francophones who are more or less proportionally represented within parliament. It's to say 72 seats reserved for the Francophone majority and 17 for the Dutch speakers, so the institutional minority. But very important is that there is also the issue of segmental autonomy. And so in other words, each language group has gained some extent of self-rule with regard to mono-communitarian competencies. Think of education, think of culture, for which the Flemish or the French community commissions are respectively in charge. And the BCR itself, the Brussels Capital Region, holds then jurisdiction for the so-called regional competencies, such as traffic, roads, environment, and economy policies. And finally, there is also the device of veto powers, of course, to prevent one segment from imposing its will upon the others. But despite all these divisions between Dutch speakers and Francophones, we do see the Brussels Capital Region as a most likely case for the occurrence of shared identity appeals. And we see three theoretical arguments for that. First, the incentive structure in Brussels is totally different from the rest of Belgium. And that is because, unlike Flanders, Wallonia, or the federal level in Belgium, Brussels voters can and do cross ethno-linguistic lines in the voting booth. And this creates some unique incentive structure within the Brussels region. Second is the fact that the BCR, that the conflict in the BCR has never turned really violent. So it has not a violent conflict history, unlike, for instance, Northern Ireland, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Burundi, just to name a few. And third, and most importantly, perhaps, is that the BCR is way more ethno-linguistically diverse than what the binary power-sharing institutions of Francophones and Dutch speakers actually acknowledge. We tend to say this a lot, but after Dubai, the Brussels Capital Region is the most cosmopolitan region worldwide, and I believe that is a telling finding in itself already, really pressing the boundaries of the consociational system at the core. Now, how did we proceed? So in terms of data and methods, we conducted a thematic analysis on the specific Brussels party manifestos dedicated for the 2019 regional elections to the Brussels Parliament, involving the Green parties Groen en Ecolo, Open VLD en MER, which are liberal parties, the Socialist parties Vooruit and PS, followed by the Christian Democrats of CD&V, and then two right-wing parties, N-VA, and the radical right party, Vlaams Belang, VP. Voilà. And to triangulate our data collection, we also included interview data obtained by the interviews we conducted with 30 Brussels MPs. I listed them on the slide, of course, anonymous, but they covered all major political factions within Brussels Parliament. So they should give a good idea of the diverse opinions within political milieus, so to speak. And analytically, we went through the party manifestos, searching for what we call ethno-linguistic appeals, following the definition of, and I don't know if I pronounce this correctly, but Gajanova, who defines it as specific, context-sensitive, pragmatic arguments about actions portrayed as best serving the needs of the community. And then we ended up in an inductive manner by identifying three different types of ethno-linguistic identity appeals. So co-ethnic, shared, and overarching identity appeals. So co-ethnic identity appeals refer to the instances where political parties directly appeal to members of their own language group. Then shared identities, where they also include members of the other language group. And finally, the most inclusive category of the overarching identity appeals, where they address all Brussels residents, irrespective of their ethno-linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And in a similar vein, we also coded the policy domains in which all of these ethno-linguistic identity appeals popped up, just to be sure in which policy domains they were present, right? But then what did we find out? First of all, we see that political parties appealed to shared identities almost as much as to their respective ethno-linguistic groups, but that they primarily tap into an overarching identity category. However, upon closer examination, we also find significant variations between and within language groups. For instance, the co-ethnic claims are most often made by the Dutch-speaking parties, whereas the overarching identity appeals are mainly associated with Francophone parties. Still, there is one major important finding in here that I want to discuss a little bit further with you, which is by the N-VA. So this is the Flemish regionalist party that aims for the independence of Flanders outside the Belgian context, right? And we can see in here that they clearly are very present in both the co-ethnic identity appeal category as well as in the shared category. And this is really, intriguing, because how can you be present in both categories at the same time? But I will come to that later. Okay, when we zoom in on the co-ethnic category, and we distribute them by policy domain, we can see that they occur most often in relation to education, functioning of democracy and administration, and the policy domain of art, culture, and entertainment. And clearly, these are all the three of these issues very linguistically contentious issues. They have a clear linguistic connection, and therefore we can expect them to be very contentious, of course, in the context of a linguistically divided region as Brussels. And also to illustrate this, I refer to a quote by the MR in their party manifesto. So the MR, Mouvement Réformateur, are the Francophone liberals, and they state that for them, a strong connection must be maintained between the regions in the Wallonia-Brussels Federation. It is a matter of solidarity among the Francophones in our country, they state. So clearly, this is for us what we consider a co-ethnic appeal. Next are the shared identity appeals. Now we see more or less the same figure with regard to the appeals by policy domain. However, very interesting is that on the one hand, we see that the more moderate parties across both sides of the divides are asking for greater intergroup collaboration, so greater collaboration between two language groups. While on the other hand, we see the Flemish ethnic outbidding parties, so the already mentioned N-VA, but also Vlaams Belang, the Rec Right Party, which position themselves remarkably as the fierce defenders of the bilingual character of the capital region. So a combination of Dutch and French. For instance, if we look at the N-VA manifesto, it is stated that Brussels for them is a bilingual capital, and the equal status of Dutch and French is essential to its role as a capital and its function as a meeting place for the two major communities. However, the interviews, also with the N-VA representatives, reveal that to defend bilingualism in Brussels is to automatically defend the importance of the Dutch language in Brussels. And for that reason, we in here see some evidence for the strategic use of shared identities, which are not, after all, always that inclusive then, because they appeal to a shared category while actually claiming things on behalf of their proper and their own ethno-linguistic group. And then finally, the overarching category, just like the co-ethnic and shared appeals, they mainly arise in function of functioning democracy and administration, but also with regard to two more regional competencies. So the community development, housing and urban planning, as well as traffic and transport or mobility. And as I said in the beginning, these are regional competencies, which inherently span the entire ethno-linguistic divide. So they more easily lend themselves for overarching identity appeals. And this is nicely illustrated, I believe, in the quote by respondent 2, which was a Dutch-speaking MP apparently, saying, when I ask parliamentary questions about social housing or mobility, they concern all residents, regardless of their language. And I think this totally makes sense. Then, just to conclude, we found that political elites, but especially in the BCR, which is, as I cannot emphasize enough, a unique consociation, a unique regional consociation, seem to be willing to reach beyond their respective language groups. However, we also see significant variations between and within the language groups. Whereas we found that co-ethnic identity appeals mainly arise in relation to Dutch-speaking parties and often on the more contentious community-related issues, such as the language rights of the Dutch-speaking minority, but also education and culture. Shared identity appeals, there is a different approach in there, in the sense that the difficult political parties tend to articulate different understandings of how they consider a shared identity in order to advance their respective political agendas. And finally, the overarching identity appeals, which are more likely to occur in the context of low salience issues or alternatively issues that are not explicitly situated along the linguistic fault lines. And I would say our suggestion to the literature is then that the type of ethno-linguistic identity appeal that is being made seems to closely mirror the distribution of powers, or in other words, the consociational institutions, which really guide the behavior of political MPs and political parties. Voilà, that was it for me. Thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Benjamin. Yes, great. And especially that we were unable to identify where our second speaker is. My apologies to anyone who came to see the double act. I also see that my internet connection is playing up badly. I'm sure this has something to do with Brussels capital region. Anyway, at this stage, I would have to send my apologies on behalf of us, the organizers, that we don't have a second speaker to you. But this gives us more of an opportunity to drill into the presentation by Benjamin, and particularly several of his interesting claims that, by Benjamin and Didier are making in the paper about the appeals that ethnic or segmental representatives put forward to their multi or intersegmental electorate, particularly on something that Benjamin has not mentioned, but this is a part of the research project, as I understand it, it recurs everywhere in your writing. The fact that the Brussels capital region has a significant presence of the allophone communities. So we do have the majority, de facto majority of francophones, the recognized minority or co-owners of Brussels capital region, the Flemish community, the ones guaranteed representation in the legislature. But I believe in this paper specifically, Benjamin, correct me if I'm wrong, something around 47 or 37, something like that, % of people who identify with more than the two communities, the linguistic communities that we have in Brussels capital region, myself included. So it could have potentially a larger pool of those who take up the appeal, and therefore I believe the findings do carry forward quite a bit, both in regards to the appeal and buy-in in the voter base. So highly interesting set of observations. Thank you. I will open the floor to any of our numerous audiences, particularly those interested in the cross-segmental parties and appeals. You're welcome to either raise your hand. We are not too many here, so we can do this. The only caveat is you'll be recorded speaking. Then, or you could put your question in the chat. Any steps forward? Adrian, always welcome. Your microphone needs to be turned on.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I find it all very interesting, and I wonder how political parties organize in other, across regions, how the local party or the Brussels-based party differs from the national party and its appeal and so on. This question of parties that operate across different jurisdictions and different contexts being caught out by what the other part of the party says elsewhere is an interesting one for me, because I imagine what the Dutch parties say in Brussels is very different from what they say in Flanders and so on and so forth. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that problem of operating in different jurisdictions.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. A very interesting question, especially in the multi-layered, complex, let's say that again, structure of Belgium. Indeed, I think parties in Brussels, very schizophrenic image when compared to the Flemish parties or the Walloon parties, because importantly to stress is that all parties, except for the Communist Party, have split along linguistic lines, and that they always take a slightly different approach to certain topics, because also they are confronted with a totally different context in Brussels than in unilingual Flanders and unilingual Wallonia. But how this really relates to one another is quite difficult. I'd say that they know from both directions that the Brussels parties are confronted with this different reality, and that they leave them a little bit alone in that sense, I would say. But it's especially hard, I guess, for the ethnic outbidding parties, of course, because they, how do you deal with that when in Flanders you're really a Flemish Dutch-speaking party, whereas in Brussels, then all of a sudden you also need to attract some votes across the linguistic divide. So it is really schizophrenic. It can be very nice to do follow-up research and to see how this intermingles, Adrian. I think this is a very good suggestion, actually, for further research.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Damer, your hands up.
Yes, thanks a lot. This is really interesting research, by the way. I would be interested in two things. So one would be when you say that political parties appeal to shared identities in a multi-linguistic electoral setting, which language do they use? Like, what is the way that they appeal across? Do Francophone parties all of a sudden start speaking Dutch and the other way around to appeal to those voters? That's one thing. The other thing is, what's the effect on potential inter-ethnic sort of vote pooling or coalitions as a consequence? Is there any, or is it something that you haven't looked at yet? So if you have parties that appeal across ethnic divides, are those parties more likely to either form coalitions or to support each other's candidates when it's a runoff, for example? I don't know if there are any at that local level.
Thank you very much. Really, really good question, actually. So first, with regard to language, this particular study, we only studied the party manifestos. And so basically, a Dutch-speaking party only has a Dutch-speaking manifesto, However, in recent years, they tend to have a little translation, a short translation in the other official language. But we cannot really disentangle that in here. But sure, it will be very interesting to see how parties appeal across the divide and in which language, for instance, in their social media use. That might be very interesting. And my hunch would be that they do reach out in the other language, since this is not really contested anymore, unless maybe for, again, the radical parties, N-VA, Vlaams Belang, the ethnic outbidders, just because of the perception that they need to defend their own language community. So that would be my answer for your first question. And then the second one, very interestingly, that you asked this, because I think about a month ago I published in Ethnopolitics a paper about this cross-ethno-linguistic vote pooling. And indeed it's very close to this paper in regard to the cross-ethnic elements of it. But what was again your question, maybe more specifically?
Specifically, do parties that reach out across the ethno-linguistic divide, are they more likely to engage in interethnic vote pooling versus parties that don't? And especially support each other's candidates if there is a runoff, or engage in coalitions? Yeah,
so indeed they do. Thank you, Timofey, for I think sharing it in the chat. They do. It was a qualitative study, so I cannot speak about frequency, but all of the 30 interviews revealed that they actually do, and that they are interested in doing so. Even the parties you would not expect to do so, because they, especially in Flanders, respectively, or in Wallonia, are the fierce defenders of their own language group. In Brussels, they do all of a sudden, just to enlarge their pool of voters, I would say. And we see that there is a very important aspect in here, which is the minority-majority reflex that parties tend to have. And so especially parties belonging to the Dutch-speaking minority have an incentive of reaching out, because they can gain a lot more votes within the Francophone, a bigger pool, right? So I'd say that it's not only a genuine idea of reaching out, it's also just strategic. And because of the three arguments that I gave that make Brussels very unique compared to other associations, reaching out is not anymore that contested in Brussels. So one can also ask the question, is it then still a deeply divided society? But that's more fundamental one and difficult to address, I guess. But thank you very much for the question. I think Lawrence, you have a question?
Thank you, Benjamin. Lawrence, you go.
Yeah, thank you. Again, really interesting paper. Nicely presented as well. I wondered if you could maybe say something about sort of the point you made near the start about sort of like Brussels capital region being a kind of particularly cosmopolitan region, and I wondered in particular if that's sort of part of the explanation of why the radical right parties sort of seek to defend the kind of bilingual nature of Brussels. Is that part of saying like Brussels should be a French and Dutch speaking place and not a place where other languages are spoken? Does that kind of play any explanatory role there?
Very clever remark indeed. We see that to name the party, Vlaams Belang, the radical right party, that even they are claiming for the bilingual character, but just to prevent the other non-institutionalized languages to gain ground. They also cannot deny the fact that it is a bilingual region, because institutionally it is. So it seems a little bit strange within the Belgian context, which is based on unilingual region, except for Brussels. But it's not that hard for them, even for them, I would say, to claim that Brussels is bilingual, because it is bilingual. And especially since they, belonging to the Dutch-speaking minority, are part of that minority. So I think it's also strategic that they try to attract Francophones, Yeah, because they also like to see it stressed that Brussels is rather francophone than, let's say, Arabic or Spanish or English or whatever other languages that are not institutionally recognized. It's a clear strategy, and they do so, indeed.
Thank you. Any more concerns? I also have one question, Benjamin, and that is slightly tapping the same terrain as Lawrence has raised. You ethnic or whatever above ethnic, overarching ethnic appeals equal. Then there are shared appeals and specifically ethnic appeals. But for those ethnic and the shared one, you do have the set of the same indicators. These are education, public administration, and democracy, as you call it. The hunch, I think, from Lawrence's comments would be that maybe the interpretation for whom democracy or this state or this political regime is differs precisely in those communities, the francophone or the representatives and francophones in that.
I'm afraid I missed the beginning of your question since the connection was a little bit troubled. So maybe if you can repeat the question, Timothy.
It looks like it's frozen now.
Yeah. Lawrence, if you did copy the question.
It cut out for me as well, so. Oh, and now he's now he's disappeared. Let's give it a few seconds to see if he can rejoin.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question while we wait? Yeah, I guess his internet connection has completely gone. It didn't seem that healthy earlier, so. Oh, I have a WhatsApp message. Yeah, so he's saying he can't reconnect. Sorry about that. We only got half of his question. Oh, here, no, he's back. Timothy.
Yeah, thank you. If someone started talking in the meantime, I'm happy to yield.
No, we were waiting on you returning.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes. Apologies. That's probably my link to University of Birmingham that lets me down. So Benjamin, I'll try it again. So you have the two types of appeals: the ethnic appeal and the shared appeal, and then you use the same type of frames, the functioning democracy, public administration, and education there, and then you use them in inverse. I can see my connection going again. So the question becomes slightly similar to what Lauren says. Can we actually trust that people are responding to the same, or the manifestos in a sense respond to the same type of a problem when you use the same data for different or same items, you know, for different types and to draw different types of conclusions out of them? Is it not would it not be tidier to separate out, let's say, access to education and public services, as public services are as a shared appeals? Everyone needs them in a sense, and then specifically the discrete perceptions of who this democracy ought to serve in, like as in Vlaams Belang and then Ecolo, whatever perceptions, because that would make it clearer. Although I know it's too late for the public, but it would make clearer that these are discrete claims and appeals that people in politics communicate to their voters differently.
Yeah, okay. I'm afraid I do not totally get your point yet. Maybe we can discuss it together once if you want have time and we have time, we find time to do so. Just to clarify, I used the typology of Walgraven and colleagues from the University of Antwerp, the typology of policy domains. But yeah, if you're pointing to the fact that there is a difference between what should I say, institutions, an institutionally based shared identity and a societal one, then I do totally follow, of course, your point. But still, you can make claims asking for a greater inter-community collaboration, I would say. I remember the PS manifesto does that a lot. For instance, in a policy domain such as education, which is split along linguistic lines, also in Brussels. So you have Dutch-speaking schools and Francophone schools. There are, remarkably enough, no bilingual schools allowed by the law. And yet they ask for more visits and like Erasmus exchanges between schools within their own region, which is quite funny because it's such a small region and still they don't know each other good. But I think even in there, it is more reflecting the idea of a shared identity than what I think Vlaams Belang or NVA would do, because they really want education to keep separated. I might not have really fully got your point,
Yeah, I think it will probably need a bit longer conversation. I do understand why and how the coding goes into it. It's just the my challenge is that you use essentially the same items to assess the co-ethnic and the shared identity appeal. So you use the same information or the same items to draw two differently and radically different conclusions. But I can see that you need to have those claims about shared identity and the appeals in order to parcel out political appeals from societal ones that come later about the transport and the so the overarching identity appeals, as we call them. So there is a logical sense in that structure, but it's just using these items that is problematic because they are exact same ones.
Yeah. No, thank you for.
Though you inverse them, like the values are inversed as you discuss them in both papers, in the Rubicon and this one. But it is dubious to use the same information to claim two different things. No, so you're acting in type of Zen power. So.
Okay. No, thank you very much for raising a point. Thank you.
Unless we have more stable connection that allows people to pose the question live. Alton? No? John? Patricia? Samer?
If I can jump in.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for the presentation. Quite interesting. Well, you mentioned during the presentation that one of the Flemish parties appealed both to the ethnic group, the Dutch group, and also lean towards the shared identity domain. What's the explanation? Does this happen because of certain topics, for example, when they appeal to their ethnic group, they address on certain topics that are more closely related to the ethnic group identity, or what the other domain to shared identity to, for example, issues that come to the fore in the political debate overlap or cross on the linguistic divide. What's your explanation of this?
I'm really sorry, Altin. I'm afraid I didn't really hear your question.
Okay. The idea is that do you hear me?
Yeah. Now better. Yeah.
Okay. During your presentation, you mentioned that one of the Flemish parties appealed both to the ethnic group, to the Dutch one, and to the shared identity domain as well. What's the explanation about this? What's your explanation about this? How does this come?
Okay. Okay. Now I just copy. Thank you very much. The connection was better. Well, the reason behind that, we guess, is that shared identity can be defined in many ways and can be used in many ways, also strategically. And so, therefore, sometimes the N-VA, because that was a party that was appealing to shared identities almost as much as to co-ethnic identities, so to their Dutch-speaking community. And that is because you can appeal to, for instance, the bilingual character of the region. But doing so in the context of Brussels, being a minority, is to actually claim the language-related rights of your own community. So that's actually the reason why sometimes we would definitely frame it as now they are making a co-ethnic claims. For instance, when in Brussels schools, so in Dutch-speaking schools, they are advocating for reserving school spots for Dutch-speaking parents so that they can be sure that their kids can go to Dutch-speaking schools. So in there, they only mention their own language community. Whereas in other cases, they have an interest in saying that Brussels is bilingual, will always stay bilingual, just because they will not get very popular in Brussels when saying that it is important that Dutch is present in Brussels because the majority is Francophone. So in there, they have a strategic interest in saying it is bilingual. But what they actually mean by that, or what they try to do, and they revealed that also during the interviews, is to put forward and to stress the importance of Dutch in the region. So that's the explanation, according to us at least. But very interesting question.
Yes, I think from the paper as well, what is clear to me, reading the out of many one paper, as well as out of the Rubicon paper, that it is indeed the attempt of the minoritized majority, the Dutch speakers, to reclaim their equal space in the context of political competition. So, and one of the things I think that we can read out of Benjamin's ethnopolitics paper as well is that in the context of demographic situation in that we see in Brussels, the likelihood that Dutch speakers would be playing music and everyone would dance to it is minimal. So the strategy is essentially to claim that at least that Dutch speaking services, education, etc., should not be further marginalized to the benefit of the Francophones who uncritically take it for granted that they have access to the Francophone education and services.
I couldn't say it any better, Timofey. Thank you for doing that.
But just reflecting on both papers.
Super. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you, Altin, as well for your question and for everyone. I will say I think it was not a bad idea. We only had one presentation, and this allowed us to also talk about things that I see outside my window every day from a slightly different perspective. Great also to see innovative thinking about the representation and claims that political representatives make in fragmented societies to their voters, particularly since there will be elections in this part of the world quite soon. And we'll see more of these regurgitated. So Benjamin, good luck completing a PhD before that. Things might change because we have now N-VA running also in the Francophone part of the country, which will change the game. But every one of you, thank you for participating in your questions. I think, as usual, this is an informal round of conversation that hopefully contributes to our better understanding of research that we all do, sitting in our separate chambers across the world, whether it's in the US or in Brussels Capital Region or in Mauritius, indeed. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Benjamin, once again. Lauren, thanks for hosting, and all the best.